G'day everyone. I want to thank Jan, Dark and the Politics in the Pub Committee for organising the event, and I would also like to point out this dossier on your table, which is some more details of the Rojava Revolution in the northeast of the Syrian state. So, as Syria enters the 8th year of its civil war, the Assad, Russian and Iranian-backed regime must claim responsibility for the killing of 400,000 of its civilians. In the bloodbath that has reaped unspeakable horror on its population, with 9 million Syrians having fled their homes and millions internally displaced. The barbaric Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, ISIL, exploited this chaos and at one point seized 1/3 of Syria. Amidst this savagery, a beacon of hope on the northeast border advanced in 2012, the Kurdish-led polyethnic liberated zone of Rojava. In early 2011, when the Arab Spring protests hit Syria, Bashar al-Assad's rule was challenged. Within the power vacuum created by Assad's crackdown on democracy in the main cities, the armed Kurdish-led forces, the YPG and the YPJ, were able to evict the regime's forces from cities and towns in the 3 cantons of the northeast of Syria, Syria, Afrin and Kobani. Northern Syria is multi-ethnic. It's home to a sizable Kurdish, Arabic, Syriac-Assyrian, Turkmen population with small communities of ethnic Armenians, Circassians and Chechens. The Rojava Revolution, as it was known in the first few years, became more popular for its progressive experiment in heroism in September 2014. This was when Kobani was under siege from ISIL, the brutal, archaic forces backed by Turkey. Images of the YPJ, the Kurdish-led women's-only militia, reached the establishment press. Even Marie Claire ran an article on their fearless defence of their region, the Yazidi population who were being sold into slavery, and they covered the Kurdish-led victory against ISIL in Kobani. So the Kurds were dispossessed of their land in 1920 through a secret Skies-Picot agreement advanced by British and French imperialists. Around 30 million Kurds have been forced to live in Iraq, Iran, Syria and Turkey as non-citizens in their own land, and suffered land-stealing policies, assimilation attempts, bombings, jailings, torture and murder of their democracy activists and socialist leaders. Turkey has the largest Kurdish population within it, making up an estimated 20% of Turkey's total population. The Kurdish revolutionary forces, led by the Kurdish Workers' Party, the PKK, developed the concept of a polyethnic confederalist model for the Syrian, Turkish, Kurdish-dominated areas in 2005. And by 2012, July, the 2 main political alliances in Rojava proclaimed the cantons of Afrin, Kobani and Syria. Then in 2014, the main political party in Rojava, the Democratic Union Party, or the PYD, formed a coalition government with the aim of creating a progressive, inclusive society, and they adopted an interim constitution. They broadened the base of the polyethnic leadership and established the TEV-Dem, the Movement for a Democratic Society, a group based on distinct progressive ideology of grassroots democracy rather than ethnicity. The DFNS, as I'm going to refer to it now, proclaimed its existence in January 2014 with a declaration of the Constitution named the Charter of the Social Contract. It reads, "We, the people of the Democratic Autonomous Region of Afrin, Syria and Kobani, a confederation of Kurds, Arabs, Syriacs, Armenes, Turkmen, Armenians and Chechens, freely and solemnly declare and establish this charter in pursuit of freedom, justice, dignity and democracy, and led by the people, the principles of equality and environmental sustainability, we, the people of the autonomous regions, unite in the spirit of reconciliation, pluralism and democratic participation." Article 12 of the Social Charter confirms Rojava as an integral part of Syria. The Democratic Federation of Northern Syria, DFNS, is now home to 4.3 million people. A population has doubled as a result of the growing refugee population from the Syrian war and now more refugees from Afrin. A revolution must be led. It is not, as Che Guevara says, An apple that falls from a tree when it is ripe, it must be made to fall. So the leaders of this polyethnic revolution are the Workers' Party of Kurdistan, the PKK, and Abdullah Öcalan. Öcalan was born to poor parents in Turkey in 1949. He studied in Ankara University in the 70s. The 70s student radicalisation reinvigorated Kurdish self-determination and self-identification in Syria and Turkey, and the PKK was formed in this time. They chose guerrilla warfare as a tactic when the Turkish state became extremely repressive. Öcalan had to flee and was granted refuge by Nelson Mandela in South Africa, but he was caught with the aid of Israel's Special Forces, Mossad, the CIA, and the Turkish secret police. In prison, Öcalan read widely and was influenced by Murray Bookchin's writings, an American anarcho-communalist. Öcalan emphasised a new political framework, an adaptation of Bookchin's confederalism within an anti-capitalist frame. His new formulations are described as a poist, an approach that emphasises organising alternatives to each part of the state, run by the people. And when the people succeed, that part of the former state dissolves. After Bookchin died in the summer of 2006, the PKK Assembly issued an impressive tribute to him. They promised to build the first society on earth around his ideas, and they did. The PKK's approach emphasises three pillars: democratic confederalism, which meant dropping the push for the Kurdish nation state and emphasised a polyethnic structure. The second bedrock of the Rojava revolution is feminism. This is grounded in their study of the original matriarchal pre-class societies in Neolithic times. Social ecology is their third pillar, influenced by Bookchin and Rachel Carson. While at war with ISIL and defending themselves against fundamentalist elements of the Free Syrian Army and the Turkish forces, the DFSN aims for peace. They practice active self-defence, and I quote, "Our theory is that of a rose, a flower that defends itself. Every being has to create methods of self-defence according to their own way of living, growing and connecting with others. The aim is not to destroy an enemy, but to force it to give up its intention to attack. But it works in other ways as well. It is a method of self-empowerment." The DFSN's economic model is based on cooperatives. Northern Syria was deliberately underdeveloped by the Syrian regime. They treated it like an internal colony. Oil reserves and agricultural production in the region was developed to benefit the Syrian elite. To decolonise the region's productive capacity, in 2012 the PYD launched their People's Economic Plan, which seeks to replace capitalism by democratic confederalism. A recent book released about Rojava, A Small Key Can Open a Large Door, quotes Janet Biel, an advisor for economic development in CSAR. She argues there are three economies functioning in parallel in DFSN. There's a war economy, which provides subsidised bread and oil. There's an open economy, which is the private economy. And third, there's a social economy made up of cooperatives and collectives, which the DFSN aims to be the dominant future hope. The current economic output of the DFNS is agricultural produce and oil. The liberated zone imports consumer goods and auto parts. Dr. Ahmed Yusuf, an economic co-minister, says 3/4 of traditional private property is being used as commons, and 1/4 is still owned and used by individuals. Indeed, most of the region's economic activity is organised through communes and cooperatives. Cooperatives are active in construction, factories, energy production, livestock, pistachio production, roasted seeds, and in public markets. There are no direct or indirect taxes on people or businesses in the DFNS, with administration raising money through tariffs and through selling oil and other natural resources. This post-capitalist approach is reaping awards. On May 2016, Ahmed Yusuf again estimated the economic output of DFNS as accounting for about 55% of Syria's overall GDP. This is despite DFSN suffering an economic blockade and boycott from the Iraqi Kurdistan government and from Turkey. All right, so women are the driving force of Rojava's revolution. This stems from the PKK's ideology that unless women, the majority of society, are empowered and leaders of the process, a revolution will not succeed. Before the Rojava Revolution, a prevailing gender system strictly controlled women and prevented them from doing anything except child rearing and domestic work. A woman had to go from her father's house to her husband's house. The social contract banned the old patriarchal system, and I quote, "Women have the right to participate in political, social, economic, cultural spheres and in all areas of life. Women have the right to organise themselves and eliminate all forms of discrimination on the basis of gender. Any meeting in Rojava must consist of at least 40% of women to have any legitimacy." The government banned honour killings, marriages under 18, forced marriages, violence against women, and polygamy. In cases of rape or other violence, women were formerly always blamed. Now both sides could be heard, and if the man found guilty, he faced consequences. They developed a theory, genealogy, the science of women's oppression and liberation, and they prioritised developing women for public life. This manifests in a number of ways. The government created women's committees and centres, women's-only military units, communes, cooperatives, courts, and academies. As the YPJ and the YPG force liberated 80,000 of the Yazidi communities enslaved by ISIL after the 2014 Kobani battle, they trained women-only Yazidi militias and welcomed Yazidi communities into Rojava. I contend that Rojava is the most feminist process of all the anti-capitalist revolutions of the 20th and 21st century. Their LGBTI work is in stasis and yet to be developed. However, due to their strong feminist politics, I surmise a sexual liberation evolution will be forthcoming. In relation to crime, the DFNS has a re-education policy, not retribution policy. Out of the 4.3 million people in the region, only 400 are in jail. Most of those are former ISIL. North Syria's ethnic diversity is revered and supported by this confederalist model. Its structures incorporate ethnic differences, and it is not balkanising Syria, as some contend. The grassroots structures contain communes, then neighbourhood councils, district people's councils, and then finally the People's Council of West Kurdistan form the federalist structure. Representatives are elected, accountable and recallable. Please have a look at the handouts to get more detail. On the DFNS's tactical alliances with imperialists of the USA or the Free Syrian Army and Russia, Erkan Ayboga, who is a co-author of Revolution in Rojava, Democratic Autonomy and Women's Liberation in Syrian Kurdistan, posits convincingly what is happening in the Middle East is the Third World War with Syria at the very centre, and there are three main forces. First is international imperialism, represented mainly by the US and Russia. Second is the regional status quo powers with Turkey, Iran and Saudi Arabia as the main players with imperialist characteristics. And the third is the revolutionary and democratic forces led by Rojava and the PKK. These three forces are fighting amongst one another, and the result is complicated with continuously changing coalitions and armed conflicts. Each force develops relations with those who seem to be opposed to the enemy in order to achieve their strategic interests. This is related to the deep and structural crisis of capitalism experienced violently in the Middle East. It is not enough to have ideological and a political approach as many leftist and socialist organisations do. Rather, an organisational and military approach is crucial. Indeed, the DFNS's leadership has an undependable military alliance with the US forces, but it is not tied to a US political agenda. The US backed Turkey's invasion of Jarablus against YPG forces in 2016. They assisted Turkey in the invasion of Afrin in 2019. While manoeuvring for position in the Middle East, it is not in the imperialist giant's interest to have an expanded Rojava. On the military and political front, the DFNS's military forces, the Syrian Democratic Forces, didn't simply liberate ISIL from Kobani in 2014. They took ISIL's capital, Raqqa, in September 2017, not simply for the people within that town, but for all of the women in the Middle East. At this stage, the Syrian Democratic Forces had liberated 1/4 of Syria. The SDF, with secularist FSA support at various points, have been the most successful liberating force against ISIL and Assad. From this and the evidence of an inclusive, empowering, economically cooperative model, I contend an expansion of the DFSN is the only solution to a war-torn Syria. The current situation is not good for Rojava. The DFSN forces recently waged a Herculean battle over 8 weeks against Turkey's assault in Afrin in March 2019. Turkey utilised a 10,000-strong Islamist militia, German-supplied forces, tanks rather, US-supplied warplanes, and the Russians cleared their no-fly zone cover. The occupation killed hundreds and displaced 350,000. The world's government did not condemn. The DFSNS have launched a Si Amo Afrin campaign to raise awareness and funds to help refugees from the region. Erdogan, the Turkish dictatorial president who has locked up more than 130,000 teachers, academics, leftists and students, is going for elections on June the 24th. And if the leftist party, the HDP, the Kurdish-led HDP, doesn't receive 10% of the vote, then they won't be able to have any MPs in their seats and keep their seats. So there's some real problems and challenges facing Rojava and the Kurdish left. So in summary, an expansion of this Rojava project, I think, is a solution to Assad's murderous assault against an ethnically diverse Syrian population. Moreover, the Rojava revolution is a beacon for feminists, ecologists and peace activists internationally. I would call on people to support the campaign to decriminalise the PKK and get them off the terrorist list. They're still on the terrorist list in Australia. They're also still on the terrorist list in the USA. I'd also encourage people to come to the Kurdish-led Rojava Solidarity rallies that frequent Sydney, and also join the Sydney Rojava Solidarity group, of which Paul and myself and others in the room are involved in. Long live Rojava, long live internationalism. Thank you.